I thought I'd give like a little bit of background into just the title because it talks about the impetus for this workshop. This is not a cottage industry was some feedback I received from the sabbatical committee that was reviewing my sabbatical application last year. And so half of my sabbatical proposal was to write a play, and the other half I suggested I would go on a book tour to support the book that I just had published in August. And I thought a sabbatical would free me up to do classroom visits, to do talks, to do some appearances at like book festivals and things like that, which is something that the publisher requires when they publish your book. However, I was told this is not an acceptable use of sabbatical time, that they were not here to support my cottage industry, meaning like that my career writing poetry was somehow equated to like an Etsy craft, or I was going to shill this on the, and that also I was going to get rich off of poetry, which I found really laughable because I've been so in debt because of poetry. If they wanted to see my finances, I probably should have made that part of my application. But really, so it very much irritated me, and I got a little, personally upset. But I don't think bitterness is productive, and it made me realize that a lot of our colleagues don't understand the things that we do across our disciplines, and that if I get a sabbatical application, if I happen to be on that committee from any of you, I may not know what is required of your profession, not just your job as a professor here at Suffolk. I mean, because our jobs, we have this there's a side to our discipline that is made up of other colleagues who teach that thing, and then there's the side where we're mixing with all of our colleagues here. And so I was so the college is not always going to understand what you do or what is required of your job. That clearly the person who made that comment did not understand what is required of a professional writer. And if I am going to teach my students about being a professional writer, I'm going to have to manage to do these things on my own without the help of the college, whether that's a good thing or not. If I just want to get it done, I have to come up with a plan. So I suppose that comment helped in some really backwards way because it got me a little fired up. So also this TLC is part of my contractual obligation to give a TLC because I receive professional development funds for attending a conference. And at the conference that I attended in 2019, I went to a panel called about how to overcome discouragement and use it as a motivating tool. So this was very much geared towards writers. But this was about people who had attempted to do many different things and have been rejected in multiple ways. They may have had a book contract and then that fell through, or they just had the same thing submitted out to publishers and it never got picked up. But one of the things where they said, the minute you say, I just don't care, good things happen. These were some of the takeaways that resonated with me. And in particular, after I realized that maybe the sabbatical wasn't going to be the way I managed my writing career, I was more willing to take creative risks, and it definitely helped. One of those creative risks that I took, and also professional risks, is that I wrote a letter to the college after I was denied sabbatical. And I addressed it to the president of our union, and I addressed it to VP Bowden. And I tried to be as respectful as possible, but I said, in light of the fact that I've been denied sabbatical, I am going to take a year off of service. Now, that comes with a caveat because I am full professor, so I have a somewhat luxury and privilege of stepping away from things because they have nothing to hold over my head. I've been fully promoted. I'm not doing anything that is wrong. There are lots of people who just disappear after they get promoted. I'm not interested in doing that. However, I knew that I needed to focus on my own work, so I wrote and I said, here are my disappointments. I'm upset that the union didn't fight more for their faculty because a whole bunch of faculty were denied sabbatical. And I felt like the union wasn't pushing on the administration enough, and I wanted to hold them accountable for it. But I tried to do that in a respectful way. I don't know if they saw it that way. And I was letting them know that like this was a conscious choice. This was not a temper tantrum, and that I had specific goals I was going to fulfill by the end of that year disappearing from service. So I didn't go to Congress. I did still go to departmental meetings because I'm still faculty, and I think those things are rather important. But all other obligations, I stepped down from committees. I let them know what I was doing. So I tried to be as upfront with everyone as possible about the conscious choice I was making and how there was going to be a result from it. I still think you could do this if you were not fully promoted. It means though that you have to weigh your choices, because a lot of our promotion is tied to money. So if you're willing to not move up the financial ladder as quickly as you could have, then you're okay. You then take that year, just do it respectfully, give them the letter of intent, say this is what I'm doing, this is the project that I'm going to work on in my free time, and this is what I anticipate happening by the end of my service-free year. And I said service-free because that's where I find most of our attention is taken. Besides teaching, it's more service. We don't have a lot of time for publications, scholarship, research, things that we might do otherwise at a 4-year school. If we had positions there, we'd be encouraged and given much more time for these things. So sometimes the source of your discouragement is what you want and who you think you should be. So like we also have to have a realistic idea, about who we are. I've always known, like, I'm a community college professor. I am not one of these writers who is hired by 4-year schools as a visiting professor for, just a semester or two, and then I go on my way. Like, I have to do the things that are required of me at this particular institution, and I'm never going to be like that writer who can go to various writing retreats and teach lots of different people in different areas, right? So, like, determine what you really want your career to look like in the scope of Suffolk is what you need to do. And then, also, not that, I actually think Suffolk's a really wonderful place to work, but like if Suffolk isn't going to do it for you, then think about working somewhere else. If this is what you want to do with your career, then you become realistic. And so this is the way I was translating what they were saying in this panel, and making it useful for me. But I think that without, trying to abandon ship with Suffolk, I think the 3 most important things here are do incremental work, right, which is to learn to work in small bursts. And don't be output focused, so focus less on the publication until you actually have something collected. And then know also that ultimately publishing isn't under your control. And then even the other parts after that, like you have a very limited time in which you might be able to do the press work for publication that is required of even an academic publisher. If they want you to attend particular conferences and lectures, it has to fall within the purview of your job, right? And then ultimately, like building a small community of writers who provide competition and accountability, that's really important for academics. I've tried it a couple times at Suffolk with doing like the right time. I used to organize these hours once a month and invite people to come and just do writing. So we'd be silent, but we'd be in a room, and it was a little bit of accountability, like, okay, at least once a month, I'm gonna have my butt in a seat and I'm going to be doing my scholarship, for that time. But people, their schedules, got a little bit crazy. And so we didn't have a returning audience. And then also, like, I shut it down when I took my year free of service. So those are like, and I miss it a little bit, but because I really do enjoy like giving back to community and creating that kind of good karma, but
were these colleagues that you were working with, or just people, like adult people from the...
No, colleagues. Like I ran it through the union, and I also ran it through professional development. So like attending could get you, you could put it on your application for promotion, because it was through those venues. I wanted to make it as useful as possible. I'd be happy if it was revitalized. I don't know if I'm the right person to, start it up again, but I think it would be really useful if we had something like that. That's the next part, is like thinking about ways that you can adjust this. So I tried to run it for a couple of semesters so that people would know when it was, and it was on a Friday so that it could be a tri-campus effort, so that we would have, because you can't have something on a common hour and expect people from Grant and Selden to be able to show up because of travel time. So I wanted it to be on Fridays. I also tried to make it like a 2-hour at least shot, so that if you traveled all the way from Grant to one particular, to the Eastern campus or something, you would feel like it was worth the trip, and it was once a month. So when you start planning what you would do, right, for your sabbatical. So I think the first thing you need to do, but the gauge where you are now so you know how to move forward. And I thought this is one of the most useful things that I did. I got it from a lot of productivity, like porn, like all that stuff that is about, just, what is it, GTD, right? God, what does that stand for? I've heard the acronym so much, I've forgotten what it is. It's like getting things done. That's what it is. Getting things done is the acronym. So, and it was created by this man. He's got a whole, I don't want to call it a cult, it's a little bit of a cult, fandom. He has a podcast, he's got books with editions, and it's all about creating systems in order to be more productive. And I was listening to some of this because I am a mother of 3 children. I am, a working parent, I'm a spouse, and then I always felt that I had 2 careers. I have my career at Suffolk and I have my writing career. And those 2 things should be symbiotic, but a lot of times they are in opposition to one another. So I was feeling a little, stretched thin. So one of the things that is very helpful is to track your hours. And I wish somebody had told me this in grad school, because I've wasted so much time being stressed out about papers and as an English professor having to grade all of these things. And eventually I started sitting down and saying, okay, when I grade developmental writing essays, how long does it take me per essay? When I grade this particular assignment in my intro to lit, how long does it take me to get through all of those? And I mean, it's a lot of hours. And so you have to know where your hours going when you do this. And I think what you would begin to see at Suffolk is that, or any community college, is that when you are here, really your teaching is taking up a lot more than the third that it's supposed to be, right? So your job is supposed to be divided into thirds: teaching, service, scholarship. That's the way it's set out in promotion work. It's anytime you talk to an executive dean and they tell you, well, I had one executive dean, he's gone from here now, but he talked about buckets. It was you got a service bucket, you got your teaching bucket, you got to put these things, more things in your bucket, and then if you see one is more full than the other, that metaphor really didn't work well, because we spend much more time teaching. And I think most of us find that more rewarding, and we just find it more practical. Of course, we're going to spend more time teaching at a community college. However, it gives you a good gauge if you look at, you're keeping track of your hours and you begin to see are things just really out of proportion? Are you spending really maybe 80% of your work week doing the teaching thing and leaving absolutely nothing for the others? Because for me, what it made me realize is I needed to have many more kind of again, systems in place for my teaching, so that I didn't spend so much time repeating unnecessary work. So that semester to semester, I have certain presentations that I can go to. I have, certain texts that I will always teach because they are useful, because they're always going to be new to the students in the seats. It doesn't matter that it may have been written 60 years ago. They've never heard it. They've never had an introduction to it. So why do I keep trying to change up text, especially the ones that I love and that I know I work when I'm in the classroom? So doing this made me look back at how I was teaching and think about what can I do. I'm not talking about automated teaching and phoning it in when you're in the classroom, but I'm saying what can I be realistic about, and realizing that the students who are in the seats, they're never going to hear this stuff again. It makes it easy. I can teach a lot of the same things semester to semester. I don't do it with my creative writing class because I believe in giving them books that they should be buying from contemporary writers, so that always changes. But everything else, my other classes, a lot of times it's the same thing semester to semester. So then I'm not doing as much prep, which helps that part be less time consuming. And then it also makes you realize that like if it's supposed to be divided into thirds, but really if you're thinking like it's going to be mostly like 50% teaching, if not a little more, what the other 50% you got to divide in half. So like this makes you decide what kind of committees am I going to be on and how much effort am I going to contribute to them. And you have to take a realistic look. And you also have to say, you know, I have boundaries and the college isn't allowed to cross them, right? So at a certain point, they can't keep asking you to do things. And that's because like you are already committed to doing other things. It's not because you're just sitting on your butt. It's because you already have your time allotted other places and they need to realize that, you know? And it's not personal, you know, it's like when I say they, it's the administration at large, you know, like anybody needs to know. So where are you committed most? Is there an even distribution of your hours and energies? And I would say even as to like, consider it even where you're comfortable, you know, like I would consider like a 50 split, you know, teaching should be 50% of my job and then I should do service and scholarship should be the other 2 parts. And I still believe in that. Even after taking my year, it was really lovely. But when I came back, I only went to the committees that I really believed in, and I stuck with them. So this is when you kind of have 2 different choices when you are denied or ineligible for sabbatical or residencies or professional development opportunities. And I see this as you have kind of longer time commitments, which are the DIY sabbaticals and residencies that you can create, or you can kind of create a 90-day plan, right? So for a semester, figure out how are you going to fit your professional scholarship and work into the rest of your schedule. So with the DIY sabbaticals and residencies, there's a handout that I gave you, this bibliography. There are just a few of the articles that I have looked at already. It's a fairly popular subject. In October, the New York Times had an article on DIY sabbaticals and writing residencies. And it talks about like taking a break in your routine or schedule. And so it does require some cost if you are going to attempt to either not do an overload because you're trying to give yourself more time, or it requires a cost if you need to separate yourself from your regular environments. So I can't do work at home because when I'm at home, I'm looking at the massive clutter that my family has accumulated, myself included, and I'm looking at all these things that I should be cleaning up. Or I have pets, the dogs want something from me, or if I'm at home with the kids want something from me. And so I can't focus on the work. I need to be separate from it. But if you come to school and you try to use your office, oftentimes your colleagues are coming in and usually you want to talk to them, but then that's lost time, right? It's not focus. So one of the things that I have done with Meredith Starr is to do a DIY residency. And we also were kind of supported by an organization called ARAM. So there is a link to this on the bibliography. I thought there was, oh yeah, Lenka Clayton, an artist residency in motherhood. So she has an entire kit for people to set up, and it is for working mothers, but she says, you know, if you are a father, she encourages you to like participate. And even if you are not a parent, you go there and you look at like some of the things that she's saying. She's talking about taking ownership of your scholarship and basically giving yourself permission to do this thing, which is what we're all looking for when we apply for sabbatical. We're looking for permission to pursue our professional pursuits, and it's silly. It's part of our job. So we need to be better about creating those boundaries. So one of the things that we did is Meredith and I, using Airbnb, we rented an apartment during the summer in downtown Patchogue. It was a 1-room little apartment. It had like a pull-out bed. We weren't there to like sleep overnight because we both have kids, but we chose a week where we both had our children in summer camp. We put them in the same summer camp. So they went to the camp, and then we went to this apartment in Patchogue. She worked on a series of paintings that she was working. We brought in a folding table for the week so that she could spread out all her art supplies. She worked on that, and there was a little kitchen table, and I set up my laptop, and I worked on my play, and she worked on hers, and we did that for a solid week. So that cost us a couple, maybe $100 or $200 each for the week because it was summer and it was in Patchogue, so I think it was about $400 for the week. But you can find these places on your own. They don't need to know, Airbnb hosts don't need to know why you're there. You just set up this workspace. So it depends, like the cost depends, like in winter, if you try to go to one of these places, you may actually be able to get a room for a week, on $100 because they're just looking for a little bit of income. On Long Island or in the summer, it's a little more cost prohibitive. But it gives you this space that is not your own. It's a lot like a hotel room. I have read blog pieces from writers who rent a hotel room every month, and they hole up for a weekend in that hotel room and they do their work. So, we used Airbnb. You could use a hotel, especially if you have, membership to one of the hotels and you get points. But the drawbacks are that it's shorter than a true sabbatical and that it's not officially or fiscally supported by the institution. But at some point, you have to say, especially if you're in years in between sabbatical is every 7 years. So if you're lucky enough to get a sabbatical, you have to wait another 7 years before you have one again. And we all know, you're not going to wait around for 7 years to do your work. So this is a way of doing it, but it does require budgeting. It requires, having some extra income, maybe taking an overload in one semester so that during the summer you can afford to do this kind of residency. The 90-day plans are short-term solutions with some cost that necessitate a restructuring of the routine or schedule. They're good for gradual progress on a large project over, say, 12 or 13 weeks. But of course, it will be interrupted by work and family. And also there's a greater chance, because it's spread out over time, that you can get interrupted by other commitments when someone says, I have to have a meeting on this particular day, and that's the day you set aside for your professional development. But so I said restructuring of your routine or schedule and with some cost. On Fridays in the morning, I go to a coffee shop. So, in order to sit my butt there for 3 hours, I pay for a coffee at least. I may buy a little bit of food, but that's a pretty cheap residency to sit there. And I'm pretty good at zoning in on my work and keeping out the chatter of other people. In fact, that in some ways just makes me feel more at ease. Everybody's out doing their business, but nobody is paying attention to me. So that's kind of nice. And I do my work there. I also get up early in the mornings, but some people, aren't morning people, but I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I write for about 45 minutes and then I begin my day. So I can write a poem in 45 minutes. I can revise a poem in 45 minutes. I can begin writing essays in 45 minutes, but longer term pieces, longer works, require longer terms of time. So that's where I have 3-hour blocks on Fridays that I try to do. But again, it gets interrupted. I am a facilitator for Braver Spaces, and so one of my mornings this semester will be taken up with that, and I will not do my little, in-place residency at Starbucks. But as long as you're okay with that, as long you can put this in, and some people keep it hard and fast. We have a colleague on the Grant campus who is a history professor, and she dedicates her entire Fridays to professional development, whether that's writing a paper, sending out proposals to editors of journals, but she saves Fridays for that reason alone, and she gets all of her grading done and any kind of prep in the Monday through Thursday, which is really admirable that she can do that. So for these, I said finding space. There's another place, Brooklyn Writers Space. So if you wanted to take a train into the city, they call it Brooklyn Writers Space. But again, you don't have to be a creative writer or a journalist. If you just wanted to go and do your work, you can rent these little cubicles. They have printers, they have coffee, and you can just isolate yourself for a day if you want to give yourself that treat at that time. But I would also encourage you to tailor the sabbatical form to your needs. So I gave everybody a handout and we'll work with it in a little bit, but I basically took our union sabbatical form and adapted it for my own uses. And so a lot of the questions that are in there are really good for figuring out what you want to do within an allotted amount of time, and then also remind yourself of why it's important and why you need to do it and why you need to put up those boundaries from the college and your students and even your family and your obligations to the outside world. It is actually really important, and I got this from Lenka Clayton, to announce your plan to the outside world. And that means, like, if you go on that self-granted DIY residency, you put in your work email an away message, and you say, I am away working on a project. You tell your chair, you say, I'm gonna be working on this research project for this particular amount of time. I will be unreachable by email. Family and friends, limit your availability to them. Say, like, I'm sorry, I have this big project that I need to work on for work, right? And remind them. And then even if you are on social media, it does help to, like, announce that. One, it helps it because it holds you accountable, because then people later on are like, oh, how'd that thing go that you did? But number two, it also lets your colleagues know, like, this is something they can do, that they can give themselves this space. I also encourage you to keep a record of your process and your progress. Again, it's that self-accountability thing. When I was on sabbatical many moons ago, I kept a blog of my progress as I worked on a manuscript. And that was exponentially like helpful when it came time to write the sabbatical report, right? So I had all this material. I think it's also going to be helpful to you if you create this kind of a document for when you do your application, and you might say, this is what I have done with self-granted residencies and sabbaticals, in this allotted time. Imagine what I could do with, like, now, an entire semester's worth of time, or an entire year if you take the year-long sabbatical. And then, celebrate and share your success.
Sarah, would you mind taking a question?
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt your flow.
No, it's okay.
I'm interested in what you're saying about, keeping a blog or a journal for the purpose of maybe coming back to reapply.
Yeah.
Now, when you were denied the sabbatical, was this the last year? Was it 2019?
Yeah, that was
So, if you don't mind me asking, did you, in light of being turned down, did you immediately turn around and reapply? Are you in the pipeline now?
I'm in the pipeline now.
Waiting to hear now this year?
Yeah.
What kind of alterations did you make to your proposal?
Well, I didn't do a book tour. I did alter it by, I talked about some travel that I could do. I mean, someone gave me the advice that their sabbatical proposal, which had succeeded, involved travel. Mm-hmm. And travel to particular institutions that they needed to go to do research. And like that kind of necessitated the space and time of a sabbatical. So that's why it was granted, like that idea that you had to get away from Suffolk. Yes. Now, I don't for my play. It is based on history. It's based on a family history. And so I am looking at archives of family history that my uncle has. I said in my proposal that if I have time and if I have the financial means, because I'm applying for grants, that I will go to England and I will spend time with my uncle and like look through the diaries. But I mean, my fail-safe is like, I'm again, a mother of 3 who works at a community college. I don't have all those funds laying around to be able to jet off to England. So if I don't get funds, it's gonna be a little bit slower, and I'm gonna call up my uncle and say, hey, can you take out Aunt Iris's diary and can we look at that again? And can you send me photos?
Were you encouraged by the, let's say, the administrator or whoever it was that now you're back really applying for the same sabbatical, altering the proposal somewhat to maybe...
And I also added in something else, because in my year that I took off from service, I created a new poetry manuscript. Okay. So I made it like half will be writing the play and the other half will be revising.
Were you encouraged to do this? Did somebody take a proactive step and say, look, it's unfortunate you didn't get it, we feel for you, but this is what you might do the next time around to make it more sellable or more,
I asked the union rep if I could meet with her, and I said, could I hear the feedback? And she gave it to me. She's not allowed to tell you who said what, right? Yeah, and so that was, that's where, I heard about the cottage industry thing.
Did you get the impression somebody was advocating for you? Did you get the impression that you were being encouraged to come back and make a second shot at it?
Well, from the union rep, yes, but not from the college at large. Because they've made it very clear that they're not going to attend to the contract, which is to grant 9 sabbaticals, 9 half-time sabbaticals and 9 full-time sabbaticals a year. That's gone, right? And they're being loosey-goosey with the language, in my opinion. Like this is, they conveniently interpret it to say it is up to that many sabbaticals. You know, our president, when we were really faced with money crunches, our last president wanted to not do any sabbaticals, and the union held his, you know, foot over the fire and said, like, no, you have to grant some sabbaticals, and that's where we are. We're like, there are about 4 granted every year. I mean, so I still think that they need to be doing more for their faculty. I don't think that I'm being blocked any more than another person is being blocked. I don't think it's particularly encouraging, like the climate at the moment, to do these things. But I don't think there was anything personal, I guess. Again, I do think that, like, if you have a committee that is full of faculty who don't understand your discipline, you run into problems. And you have no control over that, no matter what kind of economic environment we're in. So if the college had a lot of money at this point, if that sabbatical committee doesn't understand what your discipline requires, you know, we have a colleague who applied for a research project and it was denied, and really the gist of it was that the committee had no idea what a professor of sociology does. Like, they had no clue, right? Because if they had done that, if they had any inkling what a professor of sociology, they would have approved it. Yeah. You know, and sent it on. It still may not have made the cut when it came to the president choosing, our lawyer president choosing, right? I mean, that's another thing, is that ultimately this is under the control of a person who is not an academic, right, deciding, yes, this seems like a viable project. So, I mean, that's really why this is important, is you have to take some control over your own work, because we have people judging us who, again, just do not understand what we do. And, like, it's not necessarily their fault. It's a fault in the system. Like, we can't blame our current interim president that he's not an academic because he never, you know, asked for that job in the first place. It's because our former president left. So, I mean, I guess he's doing the best he can, but it's like, you're always going to be up against this, so you might as well come up with a contingency plan. That's really the point of the whole thing. So part of the 90-day plans, I would recommend taking a half day or a 1 day each week to dedicate to your project, blocking the time on your calendar, making it unavailable for meetings or classes or other commitments. Because I care about the Braver Spaces project, I have allotted that I will adjust with that time and make it up somewhere else, but I'm trying to be much more dedicated this time. And knowing that, like, a work week is a 40 to 50 hour, you know, work week, and even, like, some people work full time at 35 hours, right? And also at the beginning of our semesters, we have less work. You know, we're gonna have like a 35-hour week possibly, or maybe even a 30-hour week before our students start inundating us with work. But, and at the end of the semester, teaching is just gonna take up so much more room, right? But try to, like, remember that, like, you need to hold that hour sacred, or 2 hours or 3 hours. And I would plan your weeks as you would your course outline. Like, set an attainable goal for the end of the semester, the 90 days, like outline for a chapter, you know, research into this particular area, the series of photographs, you know, like whatever you have. And then break the goal into separate actions. I would dedicate each session to a mini goal so that you have, you know, some of those actions being taken. Again, this is from that productivity stuff that I was reading, but also I really encourage you to, like, reorient yourself. Begin by reading. Look over the material that you did before this, and then begin your work. And then at the end, record your process. Like, and that's where the blog comes in handy, or if you keep a journal, just keep a note of what you did, even like how it went, you know, whether you felt it was successful, so that you don't feel like you're starting over every time you return to it. Because, like, with this 90-day plan, you're gonna, if you're trying to keep Friday sacred, like, there's a lot that happens between Fridays, you know, especially in our job. So you get to that other Friday and you're like, where am I, right? So I would say, like, it's really useful to just keep a record, whether that's doing the blog thing or keeping a journal, all right? And then at the end of the 90 days, you know, we are the culture of assessment, so assess yourself, you know, how did you do? Did you dedicate this time? And if you use, I use an app called Hours Tracker when I want to start, like, seeing how I'm doing and if I'm using my time as well as I can. It's on the phone. People use it for freelance work, you know, when they want to bill people, but I just keep it to, like, you know, how much time did I spend doing research, going down rabbit holes, you know, like, and things like that. And that can help with that assessment. So I also spent time, and this was through the college, with the chair program. They do a leadership academy, and there's a lot of this kind of productivity stuff that they encourage you to do, but one of them is to create an individual alignment plan and personal improvement plans. So this is the individual alignment plans is this idea where you they had us take personality tests, and kind of figure out who you are, if you already know who you are. Like, simply be explicit about your strengths, your weaknesses, and then plan accordingly. That's what that is. And then the personal improvement plans, like, I included that because you do want to remember that your personal life should flourish as much as your professional life, because if you start feeling like you have no personal life, you begin to resent all the work, not just the teaching, but also the scholarship, and then you're a mess and bitter, right? So this is important to keep in mind. And I'm gonna end with the lecture part. I have some sheets that you can work with at the end, but I got this quote from Sabbaticals No Longer So Open-Ended or Available, an article, and it really stresses the importance of unstructured time. So even though we're talking about setting apart 3 hours or something, we have to remember that so much of our work is thinking, right? So sometimes just sitting alone, but not in your usual environments, and thinking about the work that you're going to do is just as important as generating the product. So study leave requires academics to state up front what they will produce during their time away from teaching and administration, he says. An example would be completing a specific publication for the next research excellence framework. But Doherty believes that sabbatical should be viewed as unstructured time in which academics cannot predict the outcome of his or her research. So sabbatical is supposed to be a rest period, the Sabbath is supposed to be the seventh day where you rest. So this idea that we're supposed to get so much done during our sabbaticals, we have to be realistic about it. Sometimes it's just you get to the end of the sabbatical and maybe then you know where you want to go because you gave your brain a rest from the other stuff. So also keeping an open mind that some of it needs to be, especially for a writer, this is really important for me, poems rarely come on demand, right? But they also are not just the product of inspiration that hits on a regular basis. You have to put yourself in the right place for that kind of inspiration, which means, again, changing environments. It means reading other people's work that you become inspired by. So, sometimes the productivity stuff, sometimes the, giving yourself the Fridays, it just means reading in the discipline, doing some kind of work where you're not even taking notes, you're just browsing. I do have additional resources, that's in the bibliography. They're all links to different things. If you want to read about what Meredith and I did and how our residency went, there's a link to that that's on the sheet. And they vary. Some of them are fairly old articles. People have been talking about the end of sabbaticals since at least 2011, right? Because other institutions have been doing something similar to what Suffolk's doing. They're in financial trouble, and then they end up, cutting all the benefits that we have, including sabbaticals. So, not that is the most effective way to balance your budget, but that's what they've chosen to do. So. You'll find that there are different responses to this particular problem from a lot of different institutions and people. And some of the links are also from business people who recommend taking breaks and going on sabbatical, self-granted sabbaticals.